Did you hear the claims that Jim Wakatsky did make about breach the hull of an unknown craft that did not originate from here? He was running the OSAP program. Have you heard that claim?
We've heard claims. A lot of that
Did
was
you?
addressed in Volume 1.
There was a person, he came to AARO with a story.
We had a referral when I was the acting director. Chairman of one of the oversight committees asked us to meet with an individual that claimed to have reported to us a UAP part. That was so shooken up, so inexperienced that she resigned from the program. He was asked to deliver doctored photographs at the Nevada test site, what a lot of the public refers to as Area 51. We know that the Soviet Union during the Cold War came up with UFO stories to try to undermine Americans' confidence in their government's ability to protect them and tell them the truth about aliens. And I had mentioned the black triangles because we know it's a proven engineering design. It helps, the fly, and we'll move from triangles to flying wings. The unexplained, the true UAP cases, which I agree with you, it's about 2% of our cases. It's very, very small, but we can confirm they're there. We don't know what they are.
Welcome back to Total Disclosure. My name's Ty, and I'm your host and creator. We're pulling back the curtains on one of the most secretive programs inside the U.S. government, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, better known as AARO. My guest today is Timothy Phillips. He was the former acting director of AARO, the man who stepped in for Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, or some call him Dr. Evil, after his departure. In this exclusive conversation, Tim and I dive into what AARO really does, how he got involved, and the explosive allegations that came with extortion of the program potentially, and internal pressure within the office itself on how to do this stuff and go public with it. If you're ready to hear from someone who's been on the inside, someone who's seen the data, the politics, and the truth behind the headlines, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, drop that 5-star review, because what we're about to hear, you won't find anywhere else. I'm asking the harder questions. We're talking about UFOs and nukes and how the fiery orbs and black triangle craft are among the most anomalous. And AARO doesn't know what those are, which contradicts what the Wall Street Journal put out. Now, Tim does try to talk about this hazing ritual that the Wall Street Journal also talked about, and I did challenge him pretty hard on that. And when it comes to using specific language like aliens and not little gray men, but for lack of a better term, instead of non-human intelligence, is that a way of lying by omission? These are tactics that would have to be used. He even mentions that there are things that AARO did and is doing that won't be unclassified for 75 years. So we had a lot to discuss in this part 1 interview. Next time he'll be in studio. I really hope you enjoy it. I'm super excited. I'll see you on the other side. This is Total Disclosure. All right, welcome back. As I said in the intro, we are joined today by Timothy Phillips. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, Tim.
Oh, it's great to be on today.
I think, I've interviewed lots of people, lots of, and I'm not like showboating or trying to blow smoke up my own ass, but I've interviewed my fair share of big hitters, and nothing has gotten the anticipation and the people in the community as riled up as doing this interview. I don't know what it is about you, but people are paying attention, Tim. People are paying attention. So I wanted to start off the conversation, and listen, we talked about this in a pre-phone call. So I just, because so many people have talked about it and so many people have put out these clips about these things, I'm not going to start I want to start the way I always wanted to start. And if you can introduce yourself, to my audience, to the people who may have not heard you on shows. I think you did one with Green Street, which we will touch on, with Mick West, which we will touch on. We don't have to get too far into it, but can you tell me, I mean, who is Tim Phillips?
Well, I'm a retired government bureaucrat now, but I kid from an Air Force family, son of an airman, grew up in Europe and Asia as and my dad retired from the Air Force in 1973, Tucson, Arizona, where I attended my last year of high school. Started my college career at the University of Arizona, joined the Marine Corps, spent about 22 years as a Marine officer, traveled all over the world. 9/11 happened, still in uniform. I had decided to retire. A lot of the rules changed concerning transitioning from active military to civil service. They needed people with qualifications and current accesses and clearances. And one day, I was a lieutenant colonel, and the next day I was a GS-15 division chief, working at the time at the Defense Information Systems Agency. And then shortly after I put my hand in the air and swore in, I was asked if I would volunteer for an assignment, and I asked them what it was, and they told me they couldn't tell me. So I went to the Pentagon and found out that I'd be invading Iraq again in 2003. So that was the introduction to the intelligence community. I was with DISA for about 4 years. And then when they were standing up the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I had worked with the staff of Ambassador Negapani there in Baghdad, and I became part of the OD&I as they were standing up, and had almost a 23-year career as a senior National Intelligence Service executive and a senior intelligence service officer. So I got to work with, served at CIA, I was at DIA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So I had a pretty diverse career, and probably the most bizarre assignment I ever had is when my boss at the time, Lieutenant General Cruz, walked in my show. My last assignment in government service was
There we go.
the deputy, and then serving as the acting director of AARO, which was probably the most fascinating assignment I had during my 45-year career. I knew absolutely nothing about the UFO UAP world. I knew a lot about technical collection, national security. I was very, very aware of that. Did a lot of deployments downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I used to working in a war zone, but I had never been part of a large investigative team looking at anomalies in the maritime, air, and space domain. So learned a lot about it, worked with some amazing people. Never had the scrutiny that we enjoyed, reporting back to 12 different committees. Committees, both the Senate and the House side. Never had anything like that before. And we kind of we had two bosses, the deputy, the deputy Secretary of Defense, and then working for the principal director of national intelligence. And often the director of national intelligence would be there when we went back and briefed them on our developments, our investigations.
So
Thousands of
let
cases of
me
work.
let me ask you a question. So were you aware of when were you as being around, not around the topic, but just being in the military and being up to speed on things? Did you, I mean, before you were ever asked to be a part of AARO, had you ever thought about UFOs? Had you ever, thought about them in a more serious capacity, maybe even after the 2017 New York Times article and the, Pentagon and the confirming, all but confirming that there are unidentifieds? Had it ever piqued your interest as just a general person beforehand?
Uh, Not so much the UFO UAP issue. Remember, I was working counterterrorism and dealing with counterproliferation of nuclear weapons. So I had a pretty defined problem set that I was working. We did have a couple of cases downrange working in Afghanistan where we became aware of the danger of UASs. So we were able to find some Iranian systems that had crashed outside some of our facilities in Afghanistan, and we realized that we were being surveilled. They were using them for ISR, not strike at the time, but we realized how easy it would have been to weaponize these things and how vulnerable we were. The fact that these things had been flying against our bases for months at a time, and we were unable to detect them. So, kind of aware of having situational awareness. Domain
Right.
awareness was very, very important. And then I've got 3 years at sea, flew a little bit, and I wasn't an aviator, I was always a ground officer. So you would see things you couldn't understand. I couldn't identify what they were. But since there was never any aggression towards us, really never really thought about it. I had enemies who wanted to kill us I had to worry about. So
Right.
wasn't about UAP or UFOs during my time in the service or the intelligence community before I served with AARO.
Interesting. Because I find that a lot of people, and I ask that for obvious a specific reason. I'm trying to set your character up as someone who is, and how would you, if I were to ask you before you took the job at Arrow, your thoughts on, and I'd like you to be as honest as possible. Um, if I were to ask you before you ever heard of Arrow, before you ever stepped foot in any investigation capacity, if I were to ask you, are we alone in the universe? What would your answer be? Would it be yes or no?
I wouldn't know. Um, I have never had any personal experience myself. Um, I know there's credible people that have experienced things they couldn't understand, and their assessment was some type of supernatural event. But I
Do you
never
give any
really,
credence to that?
it never bothered me. I honored, I knew these people professionally. They saw things they didn't understand. And during my generation, to report a UFO incident, that could be career ending.
Right.
If you're flying and you reported something, the next thing you know, you're talking to the shrink, you're talking to the flight surgeon, and you could be losing, your tickets to fly.
Right.
Um,
You'd be flying a desk for the rest of your career.
exactly. My father flew, and that's just not something they discussed. They saw something they didn't understand. They kept it to themselves unless it was a threat.
Right.
And I would say that's one of the great things we try to do with the office to remove that stigma and encourage military and intel personnel to report what they saw. We're not going to understand it unless people are free to report, their experiences and working
Right.
with staff J3 and actually, getting directives out there to the Department of Defense saying if you have, a UAP UFO incident, you will report it, and more, just as importantly, you're going to retain data. Part of the frustrating aspect of this job as we were looking back at cases 20, 25 years old, the fact that there was no direction to the force actually to preserve data. So it was very frustrating
Interesting.
trying to go back and understand the cases. And of course, our scientists want to work with the original data set, the zero ones, and, apply tools to try to extract, some type of intelligence from what we were seeing.
Right.
So
What?
that was probably the biggest change is the fact that you remove the stigma. There was actually a directive to report, and the fact that you could report these things without your credibility or sanity being questioned or risk losing access or a security clearance. That was a sea change in the
Very
government.
much.
It didn't happen before.
Right, right. And this is, and then Congress has mandated, Congress mandates the AARO office, and um, things are changing in the world. And I think, the UFO community on one hand, we're really spoiled in that way that 20 years ago, any one of these hearings, any one of these offices being established like AARO, you know aside from maybe post Project Blue Book, of course, but you know this it would be it'd be the only thing talked about for years and years. And now it's things are happening every day, and a lot. I know people don't think that AARO does a lot, but part of why we're here is to explain that there is, or to find out, like, should AARO continue to be funded. And so when were you asked to be a part of AARO, and why?
See, going back, it would been with the fall of 23 is when I was actually asked to be part of AARO. So I think I got there in October of 2023 is when I showed up as the deputy. And then Sean left the government in December of 2023. And then I became the acting. Well, maybe it would have been the following year, 24. I could say it's 25. Yeah, it would have been, I was there about 18 months. So it would have been all of 24. And it started in October of 23 working with Sean. So
Why do you think they asked you to be a part of that?
they wanted a career intel officer that was absolutely neutral on the subject. I knew nothing about it. However, I was the former director of technical collection at ODNI. I had worked a number of sensitive reconnaissance operations. I maintained the book for it, the SRO program. I was an expert with a lot of both airborne and overhead national technical domains. I knew a lot about collection and orchestrating collection, working with other intel collectors, working with foreigners. And as I talked to Sean about the possibility of working there, I saw it as a hard problem. Kind of fascinating. What if we were to take all the elements of national, power, all our capabilities, kind of understand this phenomenon? There has never been an organization that the government has established to actually investigate UAPs, similar to AARO. If you go back at Project Blue Book and the derivatives after that, they never worked at the cabinet level. They never had access to information at any classification level the way AARO had. They never had the authority to go out and have joint duty assignments and be able to recruit some of the best and brightest from throughout the government. AARO had people come to us from NASA, DHS, FBI, all of DoD, all of the intelligence community. At one time, we had 4 senior executives on the staff at AARO. We had a lot of horsepower. We had a lot of expertise. We had an amazing budget. The very, very well resourced, and probably most importantly, we had the support of the most senior members of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. So when I would go in and brief the Director of National Intelligence or the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I would always be asked, "Hey, is there anything we can do for you? Is there anybody not cooperating?" Just unprecedented support and access to any program. At one time we were investigating claims of over 40 special access and controlled access programs allegedly dealing with the recovery or the exploitation of UFO materials or UAP
Okay.
or ET.
And
Those were the claims, and we had supporting investigations with both the Department of Defense IG and the ICIG. We had a secure reporting mechanism where current and former government employees or our contractors could contact us securely. We would maintain their
anonymity.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'd give them a random number, and we would protect their identities. And that's when I first realized that there were Americans that were scared to death to talk to us. They were very concerned about being harmed.
Oh, I mean, I think that brings up a really good segue, and because and I I think if all of this was just light in the sky, I don't think people would be scared for their life to come forward and to want to, gain nothing from it. I mean, some of the people that, like you said, that you had come to you, they literally they feared for their life. Now, I know that I think most people in the UFO community, if they're smart, right? If they're up to speed, we know that 95% of what's seen can be prosaically explained. There is a 5% margin. And if I'm being very generous, 2% of that is really anomalous in my in statistical means. That is a very small percentage. So, AARO's it seems what AARO is at least mandated to do, or the idea and the mission was to sift through all the data and find that 2%. And the people that are coming to you that are fearing for their lives, I mean, it's got to make this pretty real, right?
Well, it was real to them. What we got from these individuals and be able to align that with hard evidence and data that we can scientifically examine to understand the phenomena really wasn't there. A lot of these people who came in with these amazing claims that the government had recovered and were reverse engineering or exploiting alien technologies. We never could find any hard evidence to back any of that up. There were a lot of
Okay.
dry.
Can,
Um,
can I ask you something?
sure.
When you say alien, this is something that AARO does, and this is something I do want cleared up for myself. When you say alien, and when AARO's reports say extraterrestrial, why be so specific?
We would refer to material sentient beings from a planet other than ours,
But
extraterrestrial, using that term.
but wouldn't that but if you say you found evidence of ultra terrestrial, something that had been here for, somehow is been developing alongside us, and somehow, is of avoiding us, like, and I'm really asking this as a question, and I if something, to suspend a little belief here, to walk with me, if something had been here and maybe is now what people see as UFOs, and it had been here the whole time, I mean, by definition, that would not be extraterrestrial. So what I mean is, why be so specific? Because some people think that is AARO trying to pin it on aliens and green men, and then not address the fact that, angels and demons are non-human intelligence. They're not aliens, but they're by definition non-human intelligence. And I think that's what we should be looking for, not aliens, because that's specific.
Okay, I see your point. We had no evidence of anything that we recovered or was given to us that we examined to come from any other planet than our own. The technologies that we did examine, the phenomena that we did observe were designed and operated by human beings.
Okay.
One of the things that was, I think, frustrated a lot of people who didn't understand what was the value of AARO. AARO produced quite a bit of new understanding of foreign technologies and new capabilities. So two of AARO's missions that were not widely known was to prevent technological and operational surprise.
Surprise.
So
Yeah.
AARO would pick up, we would have the services, the intelligence community use in their operational platforms or ISR systems, would pick up a signature that didn't correspond with something known. So we would have a partial signature of a system that did not correspond with, say, the enemy order battle capability. We didn't know what this was. So it would be reported to us as a UAP, and then we would throw a lot of science, a lot of sensors. We would put together some integrated collection plans, trying to find exactly what is that, and then working with the community, try to put together the pieces to understand the puzzle. And there was intelligence reporting, okay, that originally started off as a UAP incident report. So we would have an F-35 platform would pick up an unusual signature of something we didn't understand, and then AARO, working with the community, would go after it, and then we would able to produce new understanding of, say, a new or emerging foreign aircraft capability that we just observed for the first time. AARO did a lot of that, and that's going to be classified reporting. The public's never going to see it. And that was one of the frustrating things. People are saying, what does AARO do? Well, AARO did quite a bit, but you're not going to be able to see it declassified for 75 years. So it's going to take a while for that to get out there. But we did work very, very closely with the service intelligence lab. So we would work like the National Air and Space Intelligence Center or the National Space Intelligence Center. We would get reports and we'd look at it. And the first thing that we would do is there any other system that may have detected that incident? So we would start in space. Could we do a lot of space surveillance? Okay, can we establish a track? Did anything deorbit? Was there any data that we could get from weather radar? Okay, from air traffic control radar, surveillance radar, biostatic, processing. So we can actually say, okay, there's an incident. Now we have hard data that can prove the existence. Now we've got a heading, we've got a speed, we've got an altitude. So now we can build a track. And now we have an observer of what happened. And then can we take those facts and kind of have an understanding of what the incident was? AARO did a lot of that, and most of the data that we needed was available. We just never had the network or the tools to be able, to exploit it. So we're talking large data. You needed to have an architecture fast enough and large enough to take this data, and you aggregate the data. So now the data is going to be at a higher classification level than any individual data stream, to kind of understand and build that common operational picture. So you can say, yeah, okay, that incident corresponds with that track. What is it?
And I totally understand why AARO, in all of the ways that you just described, doing that actual legwork is really valuable. However, I can't help but hear a natural flaw in the process, because if you had and forgive, not forgive me, but forgive me if I don't say the right words, because all the acronyms they're sometimes a little bit confusing when you're trying to jumble them all. But You guys had is it Title 15 and
Yeah, Title
Title
50 is
10?
intelligence. Title 10 is Department of Defense, that's military.
Okay.
Okay. And then you would have legal authorities from law enforcement through the FBI or
Right.
DHS, Title 18, Title 14. So we would work together in a task force. So
Okay.
there would be an incident, and you would bring in officers from these other agencies. They would bring their authorities. AARO would be the aggregator. Think of AARO as taking all these legal authorities in, because we have permission to work with everybody in their data, and
Right.
then we could produce a common operational pictures to
But
kind of lay out, this is our understanding of what is going on. And then from that, if it's domestic, DHS, FBI, local, tribal, they could respond operationally. Um,
got it.
so
Right.
that was kind of the work that AARO did,
But
primarily when we would have state, local, tribal, um, DHS, they would pick up things that they thought were UAPs, but as we got in and started to examine the cases, we realized they were UASs. So we started actually developing and researching a lot of counter UAS systems that were kind of that short range detection system. There's a lot of great systems out there that we would incorporate
right.
with our sensor grids and our active sensors. So we would have passive and active emitters. So we would go into an area where we had a UAP incident, and then we would try to capture it in near real time to understand what was going on. And since AARO is a DoD organization, okay, partnering with the intelligence community, we were looking at it from a national security perspective. So we have detected some airborne system operating in restricted airspace. Okay, why is it there? Who's operating it? And what are their interests? That
Right.
was of great concern to us because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of sensitive sites
Right.
that our country wants to
Which
protect.
which I will want to get to. But so what I meant by all that was, now say Arrow, and again, here we go down a little bit of the rabbit hole. Okay, say I'm Arrow as an entity, and I come across, because I have the clearance, I come across a unacknowledged special access program, something that's deep black, deep covert, right? And I learn about something, and I mean, I'd like to have you probably address this, but even guys like Jim Lakatsky have claimed that OSAP breached the hull of a UFO. And I'm sure Green Street had brought that part up to you. But if you had come across something that was deep, dark, and you've already said it, some of the stuff that Arrow's done, we're not going to hear about for 75 years. So how do we know that you didn't find anything? And it's not just, I mean, wouldn't you be required by law, by your oath, and by your duty to lie to me, like, and lie to, and I'm saying this really honestly, and in the most sincere way. Like, wouldn't it be your duty to tell me that you didn't find it for operational reasons?
Well, Arrow never was a originating classification authority, so we didn't have a classification guide, but we provided guidance on how to classify UAP related topics. So the fact that a UAP exists or was detected wasn't necessarily classified or sensitive. However, if that incident occurred in restricted airspace or acknowledge some type of failure in a surveillance or a defensive system to protect that restricted or protected site, that would be a little bit sensitive. If Arrow had actually found a system that was not man-made, and we came across a crash site or remains or some hard evidence that there was something, an advanced capability or system that was not, engineered, manufactured, and operated by humans. The fact that that existed, we actually talked with public affairs and thought that would go well beyond the authority of the AARO director. And there'd be a lot of coordination with the executive in the White House on how they wanted to share that with the American people. That probably wouldn't be the director of AARO sharing the fact that we found remnants of a spacecraft that we couldn't identify, with attributes of new technologies and capabilities that were not human made. If that happened, and it did not happen, we would probably kick that up to the White House and let them share that information.
But you see my conundrum here, right? You do see my conundrum here about.
I do, but part of the task that AARO had from congressional oversight, they were looking, and as federal officers, we had gun carrying, federal law enforcement officers on our staff.
Right.
So if we found evidence of a crime, if we found a program that was being concealed from oversight, where they were using federal funds without authority, that's a crime. And Congress was very, very sensitive to that. And we actually had, a hotline. We had a way that people could call in their beliefs that there was a undeclared sapper cap that was being concealed from oversight. And we aggressively researched those and investigated those cases. And we did it in parallel with IGs with both the Department of Defense and with the intelligence community. We would have weekly meetings where we would say, this is what we heard from a witness, and we would go back and forth, without compromising our ability to honor NDAs and agreements we had with witnesses. We would always protect those making protected disclosures. But
right.
There was a lot of coordination, and there were plenty of JAG officers and attorneys with the Department of Justice to give us legal guidance on how to pursue these cases.
Which is great. And that kind of brings me to a point here, which I think is good. It is. Now, with that being said, and I want to wrap this in a bit ribbon here. Did you hear the claims that Jim Wakatsky did make about breaching the hull of a craft of an unknown? What he said, and this is verbatim, breached the hull of an unknown craft that did not originate from here, and he was running the OSAP program. Have you heard that claim?
We've heard claims, and a lot of that was addressed in Volume 1 of the historical report, which we did in a very compressed amount of time.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
We got
and
out.
I'm sure.
There's an addendum to it with some new findings on that report after Sean left, and some of the follow-up investigations that we had, and new claims that were brought in, new interviews, new referrals from Congress and the IG. We continue to research these claims because it was of interest both to the cabinet secretaries and to the oversight officials and the committees that we worked with up on the Hill. But we never, even when we had materials delivered or claims that these materials came from a non-human craft or system, in every case where we had independent labs verify the identity of the materials, we never discovered or were able to validate any claim that material came from a craft, non-human craft. That did not happen during my time at AARO. And we spent millions of dollars doing these analysis of these materials. Okay, I'm
I,
not getting.
I was
There you
muted. I was muted. That was my fault. I wanted to give you the floor. So with that, with that being said, um, so with materials, I find that to be very interesting because obviously guys like Dr. Gary Nolan are saying different things. Him at Stanford, what he's saying is they've come across some or materials that the isotopic ratios don't match anything on Earth, and they're atomically layered. Were you guys given any of those materials to also analyze and come up with maybe, you know, any collaboration with that effort?
We didn't work with him. The labs that we used to do the material analysis were basically the old Manhattan programs, the Department of Energy labs, Sandia, Oak Ridge, who we worked with.
Do you think? Do you? Is it possible? Is it? I mean, and I'm really genuinely curious. Is it possible that there are metals or parts out there that people do have that may still be anomalous?
Nothing
That
that
you
was
that,
ever shared. There was no materials that was ever shared with AARO
did
that had any unusual characteristics. Everything
now
that we looked at came from this planet.
and that's fair enough. I definitely think you guys should run down. I mean, because Gary Nolan, I'm pretty sure, is it works with the CIA and or at least has worked with the CIA. So I'd be I'd be interested to find out why a guy like that would make claims like that, knowing and that had there's this
There's
other
people
story.
with UAP, UFO crash parts wanted to come to AARO and say, "Hey, this is the pedigree." One of the challenges we had when people had parts is we would go back and almost like it was evidence used in a trial. So if you
Right.
want, proper custody and document um, who possessed it, how was it controlled, and it's funny as you were getting closer to the the actual incident where the material was collected, a lot of that, the details seemed to be lost.
Mm,
We had
interesting.
materials were sitting on a warehouse and a shelf for the last 40 years, but as we try to get back to where that material was collected, the trail would go cold. And we did have people that contacted AARO. We actually had citizens that went to their congressional representative and they wanted AARO to validate the fact that they actually had a UFO crash cart.
So,
Um,
and I
they
wanted to
were going to
talk.
go on the road and they wanted that, that seal of approval from AARO. We're not in the business to help people make money. However, if there was an entity that had worked with a part of the US government and they claimed they had material that was part of some type of UAP or UFO incident, AARO would love to help them go back and actually identify the material. We can do that. We have an active program. We've invested millions of dollars in equipment and clean rooms and procedures where we could take custody of a piece of material, do a double blind study, have different teams work on different parts of a piece of material and come up independently with what they thought it was.
So,
And we love that. But every time that was done, the materials came from this earth. They were man-made.
and okay, and that's fair enough. Speaking of parts and evidence, there was this claim made, and people have asked me to, and we talked, like I said, we talked about this on the phone, and um, you had just brought up that's AARO tried, or someone tried to get AARO's seal of approval. There was another claim made that there was a person, and he now goes by Whistling Mike on X. I believe. Um, and he's made some claims, and Burleson has said he's an interesting person, and he's a defense contractor who's trying to get contracts with the U.S. government. And he came to AARO with a story, and uh, what you say is that there was an attempt at extortion. Um, can you address this and clear this up? What happened there?
Well, Errol doesn't comment on people that come to him with UAP incident claims, which we protect their identities.
But what if they blow their identity?
Well, that's up to them. We had a referral when I was the acting director. Chairman of one of the oversight committees asked us to meet with an individual that claimed to have reported to us a UAP part. When we actually met with this individual, what we realized is the claim was that he recovered a part that fell from an advanced U.S. stealth aircraft. So the part that he recovered was actually a piece of government property. This individual came up with a new manufacturing process to duplicate the part. Developed a procedure to be able to detect these advanced aircraft. At one point, there was a claim that wanted us to purchase the part, or they was going to sell it to another foreign entity such as the Chinese. To us, that sounded like extortion, and that's how we treated it. And we referred it off to the FBI. But that was kind of the end of that. The fact that someone recovered a part from aircraft, that right there means it's not an AARO's mission set. AARO investigates UAP.
Right.
If it's a U.S. advanced aircraft, has nothing to do with UAP.
Okay, so there's what, and we don't have to talk about any. We don't have to infer anyone. So what the scenario was there was a person who claimed to have a part. You discovered that it was from a next gen fighter, but it had already been.
They claim it was from an advanced concept
Oh, gotcha.
aircraft.
They
Not us.
they claimed.
They told
Okay,
us that. We
sorry.
never
Yeah.
saw the part. The individual had some images. Never shared any of those videos with us. We'd asked for them. We did from the chairman. We did get a still image of a aircraft, an advanced. Allegedly, it was advanced stealth, aircraft that was in development. Um, Congress was concerned that there'd been some type of compromise and that these images of this aircraft had got out into the public, was very concerned about a leak. That's one reason I was asked to go out to the Nevada test range to actually meet with the program managers that were developing these sixth generation aircraft out there. And I did that.
Okay.
We analyzed the image, and the image looked like a promotion video that had come from an aircraft manufacturer. It kind of looked like an F-117 on steroids. The vast majority of our aerospace engineers thought it was, a photoshopped version of something that was in a promotional video, and that's what we reported back to the Hill. And it wasn't a UAP; it was a stealth aircraft, so it really wasn't in our lane.
So did this person ever even make it to a skiff?
Yes, to talk to us.
Okay. Oh, so there was a meeting in a skiff with that individual, and then it was referred to federal law enforcement because there was a concern by Congress that there was a breach somewhere, and that yeah.
No,
Okay.
the concern was an extortion attempt. The other concern Congress had, that they could have had a compromise, and
A
you had
compromise, yeah.
an individual with an image of an advanced concept aircraft.
Right.
That was the concern. But again, that's really not AARO's mission set. We'll turn that over to,
To
a DoD,
federal.
CI, we'll let them work that. Yes.
Totally understandable. And I think that, that just goes to say, or goes to show at least how many. So it does show that AARO is working really and intently with other agencies. So you guys are cooperating and have law enforcement that is working with you that you're able to refer these things to.
Well,
So you're actively.
as a country, we really have to federate and work with state, local, tribal authorities to understand the phenomena. We looked, if we were working with Northcom, because one of the things that we were developing was a UAP recovery plan, as you can imagine.
Oh, an actual recovery plan. So like if
Plan, because I was asked when early on, members of Congress, the committee chairman came to me and wanted to see the plan. And I was pretty new to this business, and Sean had left. So I had gone back and asked, is there a UAP recovery plan? And can someone show something to me? So there was some things we found that they thought were part of the Majestic program. And the analyst thought it was fake, but we had actually working with DoD and the Northern Command actually to put together an actual recovery plan. As we do have organizations that recover, fallen satellites or objects from space. As things re-entry into our atmosphere, often they have hazardous fuels or payloads, and it could be dangerous. So we have DoD teams on standby actually to fly out and work with state, local, tribal authorities to help clean these things up. We do that.
But this could also, I mean, is it safe to say that one of these protocols, if ever there was an incident with a crashed legitimate UFO, that one of these recovery plans could be utilized in case of that kind of scenario?
Yeah, yes, because the
to a
one
degree,
that DoD does extremely well is plan.
Right. And that's what I think we've all assumed,
But you'd have a plan. So AARO was working with Northcom to put together a plan, and we realized the actual, probability of a UAP landing on federal property or a military base was actually pretty small. It would actually land in a farmer's field or in state property, and then you would have DoD providing support to domestic authorities. So that's why we had partnered with the Northern Command, because that's what they do. They're a defense of the homeland. And that's another way that AARO kind of got into the counter UAP or UAS mission. After the Langley incident, we were actually asked during the incident by the Joint Staff J3 if we could bring some of our sensors and our scientists and help them recover and make tracks so the law enforcement task force could narrow down their search area of where they thought these UASs were being launched from. What was the past and what were the UASs interested in surveilling? So we had partnered with MIT, that were the British that helped invent radar in World War II, and we were helping reconstruct the forensic radar tracks, trying to make sense of what happened down in Langley a couple of years ago. And in doing so, AARO developed an expertise. We had our Gremlin systems that we would put out. We do long-term surveillance of a fairly large area. And of course, we're looking for UAPs, but we would detect UASs. So what we want to do is have the ability to pass that track to that local commander responsible for defense of a military installation, saying we've detected a UAS in real time, and pass them the information so they could deal with it. That's not really our mission. In the same time, if they were to detect a UAP, they're looking for UASs, and they find a craft they don't understand, but they know it's much larger than UAS, they pass that to us. So we can investigate.
So jumping back in, Tim, um, I I I was listening to your interview, and right at the end with Stephen Greenstreet, you started talking about black triangles and the possibility that these because AARO did find some interesting things, and you made some interesting comments about these triangles, and let's be fair, these black triangles have been seen for a long time, a long time by people. They've been reported. The famous 1997 Phoenix Lights incident, that was a big, black triangle, if you will. There's also been a lot of reports of, even up to this day, guys like Dylan Borland just sat in front of Congress and testified to the fact that I'm just using that as an example. Many other people have seen these triangles. What can you elaborate on what you were saying with Stephen in that interview, and why the black triangles stand out to you specifically?
Yeah, the delta wing, or the triangular shaped wing aircraft, is a proven design. So he had asked me about, what bothered you, what were you concerned about? And I had mentioned the black triangles because we know it's a proven engineering design. It helps, the fly, and we'll move from triangles to flying wings. It actually has some inherent stealth characteristics. It minimizes the radar cross section. I know that the first time I ever saw an F-117 out in Yuma, before I knew what the hell they were, it looked like a flying black triangle from the angle, the aspect I had on the ground. So when we detect force protection and security personnel at very sensitive sites, that's a national security issue for me. Because we know that we have produced aircraft and systems that look like black triangles. It works, and our adversaries, probably have as well. So when we have UAP incidents and we get credible reporting that it's a triangular shaped aircraft, that's of huge concern to us. And the other thing I had mentioned about is the corona, or the plasma type discharge from a airborne system. We thought maybe that could be a form of stealth, using some type of, say, a force field to provide that minimized, or that small radar cross section. Because that was another thing in the unexplained, the true UAP cases, which has, and I agree with you, it's about 2% of our cases. It's very, very small, but we can confirm they're there. We can measure their speed and velocity. We don't know what they are. And we're trying to do much better to be able to detect and track these things. But those are the two things, the two shapes that I was concerned about: the triangular shape objects, and then the fiery spheres, as relayed to us by the witnesses. And one of the things I do want to say about the witnesses, we had some, early on during the historical report, people were coming to us, and we wanted them to report on any reverse engineering, or alien spacecraft exploitation programs. And we had some primarily contractors, some DoD personnel, that talked about the amazing things that they saw. And we listen to their claims, then we thank them for their patriotism, remind them of the lifelong obligation under the non-disclosure agreements they signed, and set them on their way. And then we would have to start the investigation. What is this? And their descriptions were very, very accurate for the most part. We would actually get the videos, or we get the reports on what was being tested or developed, and we saw the videos. Now we can understand the description. And there was one, it was a spacecraft that was on a launch platform that was described as an alien spaceship by a contractor, a support contractor, who was lawfully present, but not part of that test. So it wasn't read into the program. But when you looked at that, and you grew up, looking at science fiction movies, and you saw this craft, you would think it was an alien system. I think with Stephen, I think it was getting pretty late, and I said it looked like an alien, death ship or something. But you look at it and you can understand, and we wanted that image in the SAP-CAP version of the historical report. So we had a version of that report, which was about 85% of it, which was public releasable. Then there was a top secret SCI version of that report. And then primarily for the Gang of Eight, there was a SAP-CAP version of that report that got into some of these systems that we really, really wanted to protect, where people had assessed that they were part of some type of, alien exploitation program that the government was running.
Okay.
And we had about 45 claims that we had to research. And another thing that was unique about the work we did, when we would have an incident, and it was actual, we couldn't cross-reference it with something known, a known aircraft or some type of event, such as
cosmic event.
Exactly. We couldn't correlate it with that. Then we would have to do blue force deconfliction. Then we would have to go out into the R&D and the research and development of the science and technology world and say, were you all flying something or demonstrating the system in this area at that time? And you had to be very, very precise as you went back into that community to ask them, because they're really not going to give you anything, but you have to be very descriptive and give them very precise dates and times, places to get anything out of them, to kind of understand what they were doing, because they wanted to compartmentalize and minimize exposure to these systems so they couldn't be compromised. And we understood that. But we needed to confirm that it wasn't one of our blue systems that was detected. It was truly a UAP.
And this brings me to one of my biggest points, Tim. And I have so much respect for you. You are a true patriot, and I sincerely say that. But I've also worked with other true patriots, and the Wall Street Journal published an article, and they claimed that the Malmstrom nuclear shutdowns were part of a directed EMP. And I'll get this all out so you can we can just have a general discussion about this because it ties into it. So the Malmstrom case being an EMP training of some sort, and then but Malmstrom is not the only nuclear base that dealt with these things. Minot, and what they're saying is the fiery spheres are a very common thing, from Mario Woods at Ellsworth to Loring Air Force Base in Maine to Langley to Malmstrom, Minot, Vandenberg. Nuclear witnesses have come forward, and when those guys come forward, and I know some of them have testified to AARO because they've been open about it, We don't have to go into any names. We don't have to go into any specifics. But these guys I find to be at least of the most concerning, credible people. So when looking at that, um, how did the Wall Street Journal come to that conclusion? And people think that Dr. Kirkpatrick was giving information to them about that. So I just want to kind of clear that up because there's very conflicting reports on this.
No, that was the fiery orbs was probably one of the most intriguing, most concerning cases we had because there seemed to be consistency in the visual, descriptions from various very credible security personnel at these a lot of them were nuclear weapon sites, not only here, but overseas as well. And their descriptions of what they observed was very consistent. So I can see how the Wall Street Journal would have a story on it because they probably interviewed some of the same witnesses we did. And we have actually partnered with organizations in the Department of Defense and Department of Energy to help improve the technology to be able to detect and actually track these objects. In one case, at a very, very sensitive location, there was a ground security force that actually followed one of these fiery orbs for, I would say 15 miles. And the orbs was hovering, was moving slowly, small car-sized object, in the air, hovering above a road. And when a truck departed main side was coming out on that range road, the system actually got off the road and hovered and turned off its nav lights. There were red lights on the back of it that the security personnel could see. Not sure what it is, but the fact that it was following roads, it attempted to evade detection, okay? And then after the threat, after the truck had passed, it got back on its merry way and headed back toward the main test area at this location. To me, it tells me that there was a human in the loop. The concern was the distance from public access into this range. So how was it being controlled? And what was the nature of that, that aurora or that discharge around the object?
So you guys are saying that you don't know. AARO doesn't know.
We don't know. And we found that to be very, very alarming. And the people who observed it and tracked it, and in one case, there were two departments that had detected it. Actually went from the range, one range onto another range, and was detected by two independent organizations. So it tells us something's there. Not sure what it is. I think it's an adversary capability or system.
But you're not ruling out, say, something else because it's still unknown.
We don't know what it is, and no, it'd be foolish to rule anything out. We need to understand it. We need to be able to detect it, build tracks, and then mediate it to deal with it.
Okay. Have you heard this other narrative that's going around in the Washington Street, Jesus, Wall Street Journal tried to say that there is a hazing ritual that has been going on in special access programs. Hazing recruits to these special access programs, telling them there are UFOs. But then, in my, at least in my experience with hazing, usually the hazer becomes the hazee becomes the hazer, and they get let in on the joke. Have you heard these claims? And did you guys hear anything similar?
We actually came across the program. We investigated it. We passed it back to the DoD IG and the service IG to actually investigate it. And we actually thought that could be the origins of a lot of these UFO stories, where we had, at the time, it was an Air Force Special Access Management Office, the SAPCO office, that had come up with a false SAP. Originally, they were going to use it for training purposes, so they didn't want to use a real SAP. So they came up with a fake SAP program. I actually saw it. It was beautiful, beautiful graphics. It didn't say anything about a UFO or UAP in it, but you had, the image was a classic 1950 flying saucer hovering in a lab, being surrounded by technicians in white lab, coats, and it was an anti-gravity motor or device, and that was the FAP. It was used. It was created as a training program. It went wild. It was probably in existence for over 20, 25 years, where, you know, personnel assigned to the base Special Access Program Management Office were read into or aware of this program without knowing that it wasn't a real program. So you probably had, you know, thousands, possibly tens of thousands of military personnel who were exposed to a false SAP dealing with this anti-gravity motor that came from, another world, extraterrestrial exploitation that we possessed. And some people thought that could be the basis for all these allegations that the U.S. government has had these unacknowledged SAPs and CAPs dealing with recovery and exploitation of alien technologies or non-human technologies. So,
I mean, but
that we actually found that the program had morphed a bit, had got out to a different combatant command, it got off into a different service. So
you don't think that's
we
ridiculous?
were aware of a false SAP program that was in existence for 20 years. We knew it got back into the 1980s.
You don't find that that's ridiculous to try to say that would explain every UFO sighting, but B,
No,
that would also mean that anyone who was hazed, wouldn't they have a pretty good, lawsuit against the program? Because
it was a joke, and then they signed an NDA. So these are service members that were managing a SAP office, and they would have in their portfolio, they could have hundreds of different SAPs that were in existence, that were operational at that base or facility, and they would just read people in and read people out. They didn't actually participate in those programs. They were just administering the clearances and then writing people off after they had no longer had a need to have access to that program.
I guess we'll have to probably agree to disagree on this, because I find that to be I find that to be really unethical to not let, because what if you got told that there was UFOs and you see these amazing graphics, and then you live your life and no one tells you, like, isn't the best part of the joke when they find out it's a joke? And now we have 100,000 of these guys running around thinking there's aliens out there, and at any day the world would erupt into an intergalactic Star Wars. That would cause some psychological issues, don't you think?
Well, that was the concern of some cabinet officials. How extensive, was this hazing? How many people were exposed to it? And could that be the basis for these claims? Your reaction to discovering that this program existed was the same as some, Senate confirmed cabinet officials when they were briefed on the programs. They were actually concerned and angry about it.
I
Now
mean,
we had another. We actually had another. I never could get the photos, but we had allegations that they're at one of the test sites. They actually had a room. They had a gurney, and they had like a big rubber arm, like a reptilian hand sticking out from underneath the white sheet on a gurney. And there was a group of military personnel going by, and they happened just to glance in and see this. And then the staff rapidly went up and shut the door and pulled the sheet back over the arm. And we heard in one incident, there was a young officer that was so shooken up, so in set of experience that she resigned from the program. That was a
wow.
claim. We also had a claim of a retired Air Force flag officer that worked at one of the national test sites where he was asked to deliver doctored photographs at the Nevada test site, what a lot of the public refers to as Area 51s,
Right.
of traditional UFOs flying over the test site.
And
And
they
those
deliver it to
photos, those
bars.
images were delivered to a bar to the east of the base there, where a lot of the UFO observers and the people interested in this topic would go out to eat and plan and discuss their experiences as they observed the Nevada test site out there. So
Well,
we've got witnesses that claim programs like that occurred. We know that the Soviet Union during the Cold War actually came up with UFO stories to try to undermine Americans' confidence in their government's ability to protect them and tell them the truth about aliens. There's been a lot of disinformation when it came to UAP, UFO. And
and,
that's why I thought it was so brilliant to actually establish an AARO office. For the first time, you had an organization with the horsepower working for the right people, with the budget and the authority to work across the U.S. government to investigate these claims and try to understand what's going on. And I know there's a lot of frustration with the public that, we didn't show them the alien bodies or the UFO crash sites, despite people who have sworn under oath in Congress that, they have observed, you know, alien spaceships or non-Earth, non-human spaceships, and they found non-human remains.
and you guys are saying,
We
why
looked
didn't
for
you see
that.
any of that?
We investigated virtually every credible claim we had. Um, I know that our investigators hosted congressional delegations wanting to go out to Dayton, you know, go, going to Wright-Patterson to personally investigate the claims that there was some type of UFO power source that was hidden underground at the base there. We know that we've hosted investigators that wanted to go out to other ranges to be able to investigate claims that were made under oath to Congress. And we were part of that, and we had authority to go anywhere to look. And I will tell you, during my tenure there, we never had anybody attempt to block access to information or locations or materials. Why, I worked at AARO. That never happened.
So you're saying that no one, is it conceivable? Is it at least
You're muted.
conceivable? A lot of people think you were fired from AARO. That doesn't seem to be the actual case. You were
I
given a
wasn't fired from AARO.
right, and I wanted to
That's
clear that up.
incorrect.
I know, I know, but people online said that you were fired. They put these graphics up, but you were also given one of the highest um, service honors and like a huge, like nice commendation. And it seems like it was just your time for retirement, and you and the DoD, for lack of a better term, split up. Now, Can you clear that up? Because people like to say that you got fired. I want to make sure
No, not
clear
at
that
all.
that's not the case.
AARO worked with the Undersecretary for Intelligence Security, and as a senior executive, we actually had to come up with a criteria on how we would rack and stack, how we would prioritize new intelligence officers assigned to the Department of Defense. So we came up with the criteria on how, if we had to execute a reduction in force, who we would fire first. So I was part of the working group that came up with it was almost a matrix on how we would rack and stack, how we would fire our officers who were still on probation. So we would spend a lot of time assessing, recruiting, training. They had a 2-year probationary period. And I just thought that by doing that, by, firing these junior officers that never really had an opportunity to work in the community, that we were consuming our feedstock. I had 45 years as military and as a civil servant, and I had already told the DNI that I was going to retire when my tour was up, and my tour era was going to be up in October of this year. So when they came out with the deferred resignation program, we did not know what the number was, if you were looking for an 8% or 10% reduction in force. So I thought I had a full career and I was willing to give up my seat so a new officer that we had recruited and brought into the intelligence community could serve. So
That's commendable.
that's what I did. And I had talked to John, and I didn't want to leave him high and dry, but we had actually gone out and solicited. We put out an advertisement, and we were actually interviewing people as the new deputy. I was actually recruiting my replacement the same way I recruited, John to bring him in as the director. We were actually, trying to ensure we had continuity, and that was the plan. But the delays that we had in getting the new administration's political officers confirmed through the Senate slowed things down to get, to have people come in and approve and make the appointments as a deputy. And they understand the officer that we had recruited replaced me got frustrated, and he took the DRP and he resigned. So I took the resignation program and left AARO in April.
Right.
So I had already left AARO, and then later on in July, one of the programs that we have, when you're on the DRP, all the rules that you have to follow as a Title 50 intel officer, you got to report foreign contacts. We've got to report our financial activities and trades over a certain amount of money. You have to report. If you have you're publishing, you have to go through a published review process to make sure that you're not revealing any sensitive or classified information. And if you have contacts with the media, you have to go up and you've got to ask permission to do so. But to do those outside activities, you have to be in the system to get on and into the database and say, hey, I've got this reporter that wants to talk to me about this subject, to get permission to do so. You're outside of the system to do that. That was one of the limitations about this DRP. It's a very, very weird thing because you're read out of the programs. You're basically on terminal leave until 30 September when you were, you would be over, and then you would retire on 1 October is kind of the plan. So I had made some interviews and I thought I had followed the procedure. There was only one time where I was told not to proceed in the interview with somebody. But I said something that irritated somebody at the DNI, and then I got called into the DNI. I had the counterintelligence and the HR people pulled me in. While I'm on leave, I'd already checked out. And I got a very nice worded letter from the Director of National Intelligence telling me that it was no longer in the interest of the government for me to be employed with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And I was terminated, and then I was put on the retired rolls.
So it's safe to say it was like an amicable split up.
They just decided that they no longer required my services as a senior national intelligence service officer, and they retired me. Yes.
Yeah. So pretty amicable, because then you go on and you're also given what was the medal you were given?
Well,
It's
I
a very
actually got two this year. I got one. It was kind of like a civilian achievement or meritorious service medal. I know Hillary Clinton got one. I got one, and then I got the Secretary of Defense Exceptional Service Medal. I think I got two of them. One was civilian service, and one was as a DoD. I got the highest ranking award they could give me.
Wow.
So, yeah, I got that. So, but it was the department, one of the Department of Defense that terminated me. I didn't work for the Department of Defense. I was on a joint duty assignment to the Department of Defense. I was an ODNI employee at the time when the Director of National Intelligence gave me the letter saying that my continued service was no longer required.
So, if you could change, we have two more questions and we'll wrap up on this part one, we'll call it.
Sure.
If you could change one thing about how the Pentagon handles this topic specifically, what would that be?
I think the way, John, and the last time we were up on the Hill, and I believe that was around March, we came out of the skiff, and what John, as the director, decided to do is just to go public and actually admit that there were actual UAP cases that we didn't understand. Another thing I think I would have done much earlier is solicit or attempt to come up with a crowdsourcing reporting of UAP incidents. The states have state fusion centers to kind of control state level response to incidents. We thought state, local, tribal, they're normally the first responders. If they hear or see something, how can we operationalize that and get that reporting back to AARO as fast as possible so AARO could respond? We had people on standby that could deploy the same day to try to understand an incident, to gather evidence and maybe capture the phenomenon near real time. I would have solicited the support of the American public sooner. We've been working on a public reporting mechanism, and with the change of the administration and the transitions, we had to have some forms approved by GSA. It's part of how they would report to the government. I would have loved to have that in place, and using some of the large data, some of the machine learning, the algorithms we developed to try to speed the detection, the building of tracks, and the operational response to UAP incidents. And we were working very, very hard to get that capability in place in partnership with an all-of-government response. We found that Department of Homeland Security, especially CBP, along our country's borders, they have an amazing network of sensors where they were willing to share the feeds. As we looked at this administration's desire to enhance air defense in the continental United States, about the Golden Dome initiative, well, there's data there.
Okay, I know they're looking at threats,
Right.
they're looking at cruise missiles, they're looking at ballistic missiles, UASs, but if we invest in that sensor technology, we're going to pick up things that may not be threats, but it's information, it's anomalies that AARO needs to investigate so we can have an understanding. There was a little bit of frustration because we had a bias in our collection because we tended to put sensors out and defenses around things that we wanted to protect.
Would
But
that include nuclear sites?
absolutely included nuclear sites. But how do you know if we have a higher number of incidents around nuclear sites when you don't know what's going on over the cornfields in Nebraska? So one of the things that we were actually researching was investing in a series of unattended sensors. We were thinking of working with Department of Interior and the Bureau of Land Management, where they have a series of towers. They're primarily looking for fire detection and disasters at the national parks. But if we could put out sensors staring up at the stars, you have them networked. Maybe we can detect anomalies before the public sees them and start having a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on, because we don't. And I talk a lot about what's going on in the air domain because that's where we had a lot of sensor capability and understanding and tools to be able to exploit what's going on in the EO and IR
But the water
part
is
of the
also
spectrum.
big.
Oh, it's big, but we were working in space. We actually had a definition of what a UAP incident was in space, and we were actually wargaming with Spacecom and the Space Force, trying to say, how do we get UAP incidents that they detect in space and at mission speed pass those tracks to AARO so AARO can apply some machine learning, some AI, so maybe we can detect things as they approach our solar system, our planet, and maybe reentry into the atmosphere. We wanted to kind of tie it together and do it at operationally, speeds. It was frustrating to be reactive or to go back and have to investigate a UAP case from 20 years ago when there was no data.
Right.
Another domain where, frankly, we didn't have a lot of success. We were just starting was in the maritime environment. So there were incidents that's in the maritime environment, but the community is even more compartmentalized than they are in space. And their primary concern was the sound of metal moving through water. That's what they were focused on. And if it didn't really correspond, it wasn't part of that threat, they didn't care. Well, we care. And we partnered a couple of times with the maritime community and helped them. We actually had worked with some cases with them, but we really didn't have a good foothold there. Most of our success tended to be in the air domain. We were starting to build some partnerships in space, but we were the all-domain anomaly resolution office, and we were still addressing the maritime domain. And when I separated and I went into retirement, but there's a lot of work to be done. Another thing that we thought was fascinating, had a lot of potential. I talked a little about crowdsourcing. NASA used to have these public competitions where they would have a problem, they would have non-classified, non-sensitive data and kind of give a science problem to the public and ask them, hey, what can you do to help us solve this? We would like to do that with UAP cases. And I know the current, John was actually working on how do we do that. And a lot of things got slowed down due to the transition and the change in government, and the fact that we no longer had the politicals to report to and get permission to execute from. Hey, I'm actually on low battery right now. We've been talking for about 90 minutes.
Yeah,
and I'm going to have to get off or I'm going to lose the signal. But I would love to do this again, but I'll make sure that I'm on a computer next time or we're face to face to do this.
Yeah, well, real quickly, I just want to say thank you for being a patriot. I know we have differing views, and I know that there's much more to be spoken about. I know what I've seen, and maybe we can help educate the community on what UAPs really are and how to investigate them. And I really hope that some people get something out of this and learn who you really are, because you are a hard skeptic, but I don't think you're opposed to the actual evidence being shown. And if it shows that there is something non-human, I think you'd be, is it fair to say you'd be at least open to it?
Oh, absolutely. Let the evidence speak for itself. We like diversity of thought. We don't want groupthink here. But show us the evidence. If you make an amazing claim, you should have the evidence to back it up. So don't come to me when you've got a claim and say, I can't tell you because it's classified, or you get sick when we invite you into a skiff, or we fly 1,500 miles to interview, and now you get squirrely on us. Look, if you believe in something, share with us. I hope we all are in a search for the truth, and we shouldn't let the truth, intimidate us or scare us. We want to know the truth. I look at it as as a retired Marine, as an intel officer. I'm concerned about the national, security issue here. Something we don't understand that's operating, in close proximity to sensitive locations or operational forces. I want to know what the hell it is.
Because we don't, and we need to.
We don't. And it's a concern. And maybe next time we get together, we'll start on that. But I'm going to lose you on the power.
All right, Tim.
But hey, it's been great. I hope you got enough to edit this and put something together.
Oh, don't worry. I definitely did, Tim. So we will we'll talk soon. And again, you're a patriot, and again, I think we need not surround ourselves in echo chambers, and we need to talk to people that are skeptical and have opposing views to my own. And you've been in the official capacity, so thank you for your service, Tim. And thank you everyone for being here. Tim, you can get out of here. I know your battery's gonna die. That was Tim Phillips, everybody, former acting director of AARO, and now retired, looking for his next adventure. So with that being said, make sure to like, share, subscribe. And if you want to be able to watch early access to these episodes, please become a member and help support the show. It is not free to run this kind of program, and it is not easy. So with all that, I love you guys, and I'll see you on the other side.